What is up, you guys? Welcome back. So pretty exciting stuff happening this week. Micron will be announcing their earnings report this Thursday. And, that is going to probably send the stock up or down, anywhere between, 5 to 10% in either direction. And, it's going to be a really big, I personally think that this is going to be a really big earnings report for Micron. And it's going to really kind of cement, investors' confidence or lack thereof in the company over the next year or so. I know a couple of people, they've said that, oh, it's just another earnings report. It doesn't really mean anything. But I do think that this earnings report is going to be extremely crucial to Micron, and I'm gonna go into that in a second. For those of you that are new to my channel, my name is Dan, and this is Millennial Investing. I go over tech and finance topics, kind of go through my opinions on things or why exactly I'm doing things the way I am in the market. And so, if you guys enjoy any of that, stick around, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's get in the video. So in this earnings report, I'm mainly looking at 4 key aspects from what Micron is going to be coming out with. I'm not super, hyped up on, earnings or revenue. And, that might sound a bit odd because people normally, when they look at an earnings report, they want to see, okay, did you beat revenue? What's the EPS? Things like that. And the main reason why I am not too worried about that is that we know that from a book value and a fundamental standpoint, Micron is undervalued. Micron makes a lot more money, currently anyways, than is represented in the stock price. I mean, if you look at the majority of their ratios, they're significantly undervalued, and that's why the majority of people have flocked to Micron and tried to make heads or tails of what's going on. And so I think that the more fundamental, forward-looking statements are going to be much more important than what the actual numbers are for the company. And so 4 main points I'm looking at are going to start off with the one that I think is most important, and that is debt. So Micron, over the past year, has started to pay down from $20 billion at the beginning of last year, and now in their last earnings report, they are sitting around $12 billion. So that means that they've paid down $8 billion off of their free cash flow in order to kind of curve the company for whenever the next, downturn in the RAM and NAND category category of semiconductors start to become, either oversupply or demand starts to go down, and, inherently their cash flow will go down. So I think that's pretty smart, and I want to really see that number to continue to go down. Kind of on that topic brings me to my next one, is that they are building a new factory, or they have at least alluded to building a new factory in Virginia. They have talked about, locations in Massachusetts and Virginia, but it looks like the Virginia site will be the one that they go ahead with, and it's going to be interesting to see how they fund it and how much money they're going to be spending on it. Now, this is probably going to be paid for with debt. Debt, as of right now, depending on what rates they get, it's still reasonably cheap to get debts, especially for building a factory. So that might not be too bad, but I don't want to see them. I want to see them at least the majority of what they pay, to be, with cash, because I'm not looking forward to, say, Micron dropping another $5 billion onto their, their liabilities just to, say, make up this new factory when they know that everybody's already expecting the fact that RAM is going to be slowing down in the next few years. And granted, the factory won't be operational, for a couple of years, but I just really don't want to see them kind of, going in a different direction than what I think is the top priority right now. So that's kind of something that I'm just keeping my eye out for. Another thing, and the most important when you think about Micron's longevity, is what's going to be going on with Micron. What's going to be going on with Micron and China. So, I've covered it for a while now, and that's actually why there's the majority of pessimism in Micron stock right now, is that a couple of quarters ago, China started to impose bans on Micron products. Now, there were about 26 products that got bans, but they never released an exact list, neither China nor Micron, that said exactly what those products were. So whether those were, less hot items, when Micron first announced their, response to this, they said it was only going to impact about 1% of annual sales. However, their annual sales were already largely done when that was, priced in, because the majority of people, when they buy semiconductors, you buy them a while in advance, and then they get that money as a receivable. And so the amount of sales they were having for the quarter, once that already came out, is, kind of already priced in. So it's going to be interesting to see really how much of a further impact that's going to be on, say, next year's anticipated earnings. And it's also going to be interesting to see that they were taking it back to court, and they were trying to have China rule differently in their favor. You know, they've given a lot of money into the local economy into China. You know, they've been there for over 20 years. You know, the majority of their operations are based in China. So they're hoping that the Chinese government will rule in their favor. But, you know, who's to say, especially with all the trade war going on right now. And, you know, China just rebutted against Trump with imposing their own tariffs again. So who knows exactly how friendly they're going to be to U.S. companies, but hopefully, you know, we can be a little optimistic on it, but make sure to keep an eye out for that. And we also really need to keep an eye out for the Chinese competitors. So the Chinese competitors are kind of the other thing that will eventually probably lead to the oversupply of the DRAM space. And there have been talks about it, you know, in recent quarters. That's actually how the China ban started with their individual products. But you know, in order to make a company go from, you know, scratch to creating really advanced and successful products generally takes 2 to 3 years anyways. So unless, say, the government, unless they're getting an extreme, you know, amount of funding of all these new companies starting up in China, I don't think that in the short term we have to worry about anything. And if Micron is able to, say, solidify, you know, their logistics and their supply chain better, I don't even think it will be that big of a deal in the future. Because Micron will continue to have the leading technology in these two spaces. So that's just something to keep an eye about, and I'll see if Micron talks about that, you know, in the earnings report. I'm hoping they do. I'm hoping they go into it a little bit. But if anything else comes out from, say, one of the Chinese companies, that'll be really interesting to look for. And the last thing is obviously their guidance. Now, their guidance, I'm not too focused on what their raw revenue is going to be, but I'm focused on inherently what their growth is going to be in specific sectors. So cloud computing and server side, I think, is going to be something that could potentially curve the next downturn in RAM and NAND prices, because this is an industry that wasn't really as big as it was back when the last cycle hit. So I think that depending on what the growth is going currently, that's going to be able to kind of curve Micron and say, rather than dropping 70% from their all-time high, they might only drop 30% or 40% once, you know, everybody thinks that the cycle's over and that, you know, their RAM is just a useless commodity at that point. So I think that that's going to be the biggest part. Second part is the new GPU wave. Now, a lot of people don't really connect the dots here, and a lot of people think that, okay, I'm going to just invest in NVIDIA and AMD because they make GPUs. GPUs, you know, are used a lot more than RAM, but coincidentally, those GPUs use RAM, or they use this particular type of RAM, which is GDDR. Now it's up to GDDR6. And so in the last brand of, say, like NVIDIA's GPUs, that RAM was supplied by Micron. AMD hasn't released who is going to be their RAM supplier yet, but I'm pretty optimistic thinking that Micron's going to be able to secure that just because of where Micron is in the graphical RAM area. And I also think NVIDIA will continue to use them for the ongoing future. So depending on what AMD and NVIDIA does, it's going to directly relate to Micron, because if they're selling a lot of GPUs, then you can expect that Micron's going to be selling them a lot of RAM. And, you know, with the amount of RAM that they're now packing into these GPUs, I think the newest NVIDIA series has about 12 to 16 gigs in their cards, depending on what the overclocked ones are going to be. So it's definitely a lot of RAM per card that's going to be going in. So that could be a great revenue stream for Micron in the short term as well. And then another thing that you really need to look for is at the mobile space. So this, it's going to kind of be, Micron is going to be in the lagging end of really understanding where this is going to go. But they will have somewhat of a guidance to orders that have already been placed. So if you, for example, think about like the new Apple Wave, Apple gets a lot of their RAM from either Samsung or Micron. And Apple is currently trying to switch into making all their semiconductors, but again, they cannot really, they're trying to do a lot of things all at once and try to make the iPhone, from the bottoms up and have no reliance on anybody else from that, at least with the current trends that they're going. But if you expect that, say, mobile phones, especially the new iPhones, are going to be a huge success, you can really bank on Micron cashing in a lot of that earnings from Apple, because Apple's going to be using a lot of their RAM for all of their products. And if you look at, all the flagships from Samsung right now and Apple, if you look at the amount of RAM that each phone's packing, you're getting anywhere between 4 and 8 gigs of RAM per phone now. And, if you go back to, say, when the last RAM cycle happened, You can look at like the S5, and I think it had 2 gigs of RAM. So if you just think about that going up at a 4 multiple, you know, in just a short term, I definitely think Micron's going to be getting a lot more revenue, you know, in this cycle. So it's going to be interesting to see, okay, if all of these aspects that are buying the RAM are just rapidly increasing their RAM, even with falling RAM prices, the sheer quantity and increase of the amount of demand for it might just kind of taper out the effect of, you know, a falling price for the actual unit. So that's kind of it that I'm looking for, you know, in this particular earnings report. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens. And, you know, based off all that, again, I'm going to pretty much decide where I'm going with my position based off of this earnings report, because I think it's going to give the most amount of insight for what happens the next couple of years. So that's kind of it, and I hope you guys got some use out of that. You know, a lot of you asked me like to do live trading, and eventually I'll get to that, but you know, for right now, what happens at the earnings day, I'm not going to be able to record, you know, whether I buy, sell, or hold shares, at least for right now. So this is a way that you guys can kind of see what I'm going to be doing, and I hope that, you know, you guys are able to think about it in a different way, and maybe, you know, see some value or see a value trap, depending on what the market says, and make your own choice for it. So, hope you guys liked the video, just a quick update, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.